in that slot.
As a contingency, if he turns up, I'll share my time with Deputy O'Donnell, but if he doesn't, I reserve the right to keep going. We wouldn't like to give. And I have to say that there was a time when a lot of time was given to the finance bill, and I was a bit disappointed that I understand it's to finish this evening. And I noticed in recent Dáils,
it's to run today. It's not to necessarily finish.
Okay.
The slots aren't been finished.
I'm glad to hear that.
I'll hold the clock for a moment. It's not down to finish today, Captain. Níl sean chin le creek.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I notice every time I get onto the whip's office, I'm told 5 minutes and 10 minutes and whatever. And
It's a 20-minute slot.
Yeah,
it proceeds in 20-minute slots. It does not necessarily finish today. But if the
there must be some misunderstanding.
If the slots aren't finished, it will finish. But if the slots are filled, it will not.
I can't understand. I asked the whip's office for 20 minutes, and they were kind of saying, "No, we've a limited number of slots."
Well, I think you might take that up with the whip.
I will certainly.
Last
count choirle. Blachan le the choirle.
Okay.
Maris two and last count choirle. I think information about going down the choirle horse.
Okay. Lenny, would you
rather?
Agus an clog gan mil mat.
Blachan an wechas let us the choirle. Agus bín deach choirle fáil in eisce with the gúna. First of all, I'd like to deal with some specific issues in the budget. And in the second half of what I've been speaking about, I'd like to talk about the wizardry of modern finances and how, as a simple person, I wonder at times how this magic money is always coming about. And there used to be certain days matter couldn't be created or destroyed, but then it was found if you split the atom you could destroy matter, but you could create energy out of it, so it became that energy could not be created nor destroyed. There used to be principles in relation to finance, that there was no such thing as a free lunch. But the world seems to be having a great free lunch at the moment. And I'm wondering if it's so simple, why it wasn't done before. But I think it is something that it's worth debating. But before we come to those issues, people have to live in the immediate, and in the immediate effects of a pandemic. And the first thing I think we have to recognise is that a big slice of society, those whose incomes have stayed the same, because they haven't had the same spending opportunities either on holidays or on hospitality or whatever, actually are probably going to save more money or have more money for paying off their debts than they would have had otherwise. Because every time there's a lockdown or even a semi-lockdown, the opportunities for spending money reduce. And then there's the other half of our society who have been absolutely impoverished by what has happened. Many of them small and medium enterprises who had never depended on the state, got on with their business, and who now find that the basis of business has disappeared. Now, in the main, I would have to say I think the government has done a reasonable job trying to help a fair number of people with fairly accessible schemes. I don't get a huge number of complaints about accessing the schemes, but we do know that there are significant sectors that the schemes keep seeming to miss. And it's something I think we have to go back and look at again and go around and see what sectors, what types of business are still left out of the loop. When the initial pandemic payment came in, because it was based on what you earned in January, February, March, all of the seasonal industries in the West were left out. And that was a huge, huge challenge. Because in the more rural parts of the country, depended on seasonal tourism, January, February, March actually is holiday time. So they get a break from the really hard work of doing 12 and 14 hours a day from Patrick's Day or from Easter back into the back end and up to Christmas sometimes. When we look at the CRSS, there are two conditions. Your business has to be closed down by the close down. And the other condition I understand that's there in practice is that you have to have an office or some place of business. Now, there are many businesses in this country that don't have a specific place of business. The place of business is their own homes. And there's nothing wrong with that, because if we went back 150 years, cottage industries were prevalent, farming was prevalent, things that were done from people's own homes. It's only in the more modern world we've insisted on everybody having an office and so on. And that really actually was a function of telecommunications. It's hard to believe that when I went to Carnamona, the first shock I found out is it was hard to get a telephone. And when we built the co-op first, it took us a year to get a telephone, and unless you were in the office, you couldn't be rung. Now, for younger people, they've never experienced the world without the phone in their pocket, so wherever they were, that's where their office is. So we've progressed into a fantastic situation. There's no need for an office. So when we look at the CRSS, people like the limousine business, all of those businesses to provide services got caught out. Strangely, also, when I look at small fishermen and other groups, they're not in a good way because it was a market collapse, not that they were stopped fishing. When I go back to, for example, limousine owners were told that there's all these loans available. But they're only if you bought an extra limousine. Who's going buying an extra limousine at this stage? It's hard enough to pay for the one you have. What they actually needed was help with the money that they had borrowed. I would have to say that on a bigger policy level, on welfare and tax and so on, we seem to have moved into an as-you-were situation. No policy change. There were little bits here or there, and the earned relief was brought up to 1650, but that was going there anyway. But there was no significant shift to how we're doing our taxes or how the burden of taxes lies. And these can be done in a cost-neutral way. I hope that's not a sign of things to come, because I think we do need changes in our tax system. And as I've often said, for the ordinary person living their life, trying to make tax returns or whatever, it is my view that the tax system is inordinately complicated and that we need to look at making life simpler. The last 10 years, with the introduction of the USC and its multiple rules and crinkles, has added a third payroll tax. I believe that we would be better returning to the two-tax system of tax and welfare and PRSI contributions. And I think the present one is just ministering to a fetish of the Department of Finance that's a backdoor way of taxing people on low incomes, which I disagree with. I also have to say that for the last 10 years, the age exemption was reduced and has stayed reduced. And the basic tax credits have stayed the same. So as, for example, welfare has gone up. I think I counted 7 or 8 increases in the last 10 years at 5 or a year. It's gone up €35 a week. More and more people with a small private pension wind up, or small self-employment wind up in the tax net. I believe that that is a clear policy of finance, because it seems to me they actually want to take more tax off the low paid. Now, I'd like to come to an issue that puzzles me, and that I wonder how it is that there's no comeback on it. And that is that every country in the world has had a bad economic year. Well, their governments have had a bad economic year. There are sectors of economies, for example, high-tech, that all the companies that work online and so on, and who sell all the programs that we all get into every day, anybody whose business is to sell services, internet service, I don't mean selling services on the internet, but internet services, they've had a great year. But most governments have wound up spending a lot more money than they're taking in and creating huge deficits. And we're told, and with justification, that there's no harm in borrowing 20 billion, 30 billion, name the figures, keep writing the checks, because we can get long-term money for free. That monopoly money is now the way the world is. Now remember, we're borrowing, say, 30 billion in this country, but when you take that across all the countries of Europe and all the countries of the world, there's a massive amount of borrowing coming on. Now, in the old days of conventional banking, if you were borrowing a huge heap of money, somebody had to save that money and put it in the bank and give it out to you. But we've gone way beyond that in the sophistication of our systems. So this is not money that was saved and made and invested and therefore borrowing. This is, as far as I can see, and I'm very open to the Minister of State here, who's an erudite man, explaining to me, where is all the money coming from? Why is it being given out for free? And what effect is it going to have long term? Because somebody is going to tell me this is going to have no effect long term, that free money can be written every year, it defies every rule of convention in economics that would have been here until the last 2 years. And if you had suggested doing this, that Europe would do this, just keep printing money all the time, if you had suggested doing this 10 years ago when the other crisis was there, they say, no, you have to borrow the money on the market. The money has to be real, and you just can't keep writing blank cheques. Now, I much prefer this way of solving the problem than the last way of solving the problem, where we're paying 10 and more percent for money, 8 or 9% for money at some stage, some stages. But I still query that it is this handy, that you can keep doing this, and that there isn't going to be a kickback somewhere, a sting in the tail. Now, the logic of what we're doing would seem to me that what we would have been told is that if you keep creating money out of nothing, if banks, central banks all over the world keep creating all this money out of nowhere, that you would create rampant inflation. Now, everyone's going to tell me that's not happening. It's sure not happening at the moment, but maybe that's because there's a constraint on people spending. But I see very little commentary on this. I see very little questioning as to how we suddenly wound up in this utopia that you can just keep writing and writing and writing money that has no effect on inflation, there's no effect on the value of money, and that the answer to all the world's problems in terms of finance was really there handy all the time. Now, I'm sure it's not that simple. Nothing ever is. If we look at all the downturns before, and of course we do realise that what happened in the 30s in Europe was hyperinflation. Sometimes in Ireland, debate at the higher level is very much focused on today, on orthodoxy, and not rocking the boat, and not question the basic logic of the situations in which we find ourselves. I said at the beginning when I spoke that we've created two sections of society, one that's, when it's lucky, depending on subsidies from the state, when it's unlucky, it's just told to suck it up even though they're facing dire financial personal problems. And the only thing they've been offered are new loans for new equipment, but they're not being offered any help with the debts they have. And on the other hand, there are a lot of people, if the truth is told, who are better off than some in certain types of business who are a lot better off. Now, my worry is, of course, that when things settle down and when COVID disappears, which no doubt it will, that we will get rapid inflation. That when you create an over-generous money supply, that will happen. That you get price inflation. And that what we're actually going to do is hit on a second whammy all the people who've been hit on the first whammy. And the people who weren't hit in the first whammy will be relatively better off because they will have much less borrowings, no borrowings, please God. And they no doubt have invested before the chickens come home to roost in long-term savings at very, very low interest rates. And if the interest rates go up, their money will go up. That's what happens. And therefore, they go up. On the other hand, the people who have to borrow to survive will find that the interest rates and new borrowings for them will go up and that they won't be immune. Now, some people might say, the economists assure us. I'm sure they will. I'm sure all the European economists and the people writing all this money are going to assure us that everything's under control. There's a saying that once bitten, twice shy. I sat in government when report after report, OECD and all the rest came in, the 2008 period. And there's no point in people denying it. There were a few outlier economists, there were a few people who questioned. But the vast majority of reputable economists at the time told us that it would be a soft landing and so on and so on. I remember when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac broke in America, putting a phone call through to the Taoiseach's department at the time, to an official, a senior advisor, saying, has this implications for Ireland? And I was blithely assured that no, we didn't have subprime lending in Ireland, and that this was of no issue, and that everything was under control. I don't think I need to emphasise or go into any detail about what the real truth was. That on that sunny day, when the news broke of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae in the United States of America, we saw at the beginning of a huge international financial turmoil which scarred many people and hurt many people. So, Minister, I hope when you're summing up, you will be able to explain to me in simple English how suddenly the world has changed so much because of COVID that we could start writing all this money right across the world, and there's literally no downside to it. There's going to be no day of reckoning. And if it's as simple as that, will you tell me, why didn't the economists think this one up a long, long time ago? Because we could have provided a lot of services that a lot of people needed, and we needn't have worried about the cost. Good morning.